Alright, we're going to work on creating an underwater scene, marine life scene, but I need to make some various shades of blue or tints of blue. So I've got some white over here. I've got a small stick, it could be a popsicle stick, whatever you use for mixing. And I'm going to mix up a lighter, some different values of blue. Okay, and I actually left this over here so that I could mix some in here, because I want a really light blue. So more white, just a small amount of your true blue. Mix it together. There we go. And you could go lighter than this if you need to. Alright, but that's where I'm going to stop, because we're just trying to do a quick demonstration of some techniques that you can use to create an underwater scene. So I'm going to wipe off my mixing stick, so if I need it later, I'll set that aside. Alright, so I'm actually going to start up here with white, just plain white, and it's not going to show up much at first, but while it's still wet, we're going to continue in with the other colors. So I'm doing kind of a smiley face pattern here, back and forth. If you feel like your the paint's drying too fast, you can put just a little water on it. This will help with the blending. Alright, now I'm going to move to my lighter blue that I made of the two. And I'm going to go right next to where the white was, and I'm going to continue that smiley face pattern. And you can see the white is starting to blend in. And I'm going to move out further. Okay, and you can go back in there, and I'm lessening the pressure on my brush so it's only picking up a little bit of that white and blending them in, so it makes a smoother transition from the white to the lighter blue. Alright, and I may add a little more water to this, depending on the heaviness or the weight of the paper that you have, the thickness. It may buckle a little bit. I'm just using a regular multimedia paper here, 80-pound weight. Okay, so now I'm going to move to my next level of blue. Okay, and if you feel like that's too big of a jump, you can always fade them a little more. I've added a little water there, so this Tempera Paint will blend together more gently. Okay. Alright, so we're creating our background first, the background being the water. And it's gradually getting darker as we move away from our light source at the top. Okay. And the cool thing I like about acrylics, or tempera in this case, is that once they're dry, they're opaque, we can draw on them, we can do whatever, and we can build up more layers of color and create our scene. So I'm going to move to pure blue. I added a little more water to my brush just to make it move a little more smoothly, and again to help it fade in one into the next. Right, because gradually it's going to get darker and darker. And as I move down, I can take some more of just that straight blue, put it on there. Pure blue. And then if it looks like it's getting too, we need to go a little darker because I still have room, I'm going to take some black and I'm just tapping it in here. I don't really care if it's completely mixed because black is pretty powerful. It'll take over. But I'm just letting the mixing happen as I'm brushing it on my page. And again, you can hit a little bit of water in there to help smooth that transition so it becomes thinner, more like a glaze, as it goes from the pure blue down into the shade of blue, the deeper midnight blue that we created by adding a little bit of black. Okay, so I'm going to get that all finished up. And then we're going to let that dry. And once that dries, we'll be able to do some more details. Start adding what's living in our ocean. So whether it's going to be a shark, dolphins, coral, that's the stuff we're going to be working on now that my brush is almost out of paint. I kind of worked it back up in here. Alright, so I've got my nice transition of color. We're going to let that dry and we'll come back to it in just a little bit and do the next step. Alright, so my background is now dry, and you might be able to see that I've also drawn in, so I've actually drawn right on top of the dry paint, my subject that I want to include here. So this is a sea turtle, and I'm getting some colors ready, and the picture I'm looking at, I notice there's a lot of yellow in the background, so I've got that, and then there's also some brown as far as the shell and some of that. So I'm actually going to be using some of both. This brown that I happen to have looks a little bit as a warm brown. Seems a little bit red, but I'm going to make a lighter tint of that, or a later shade. Okay, so I'm adding some yellow to it just to change it up a little so that I can get some differences in values, create shadows. All right, and depending on how strong that yellow is, you might need more. If it's sometimes paint brands vary as far as how much pigment's in them. Pigment is what gives the paint its color. If there's not a lot, then it's going to take a lot more to change one it is. Alright, so I've got a slightly different brown here, and I can even change it more. As I'm painting, quite often I do. I get my basics ready, and then as I go, I mix more when I need to create shadows and such. Alright, so I've mixed that up. I cleaned off my little mixing stick there, so it's ready for later. Doesn't matter if it's stained, it still works. Alright, so I'm going to work with this, and this Tempera Paint is pretty good because it does allow you to paint in layers. I'm actually going to start with my yellow because this is going to be my base color. And you're going to notice this yellow is thinner. I thought it was when I was looking at it. And that's okay if it pulls some of the color underneath it through because you're underwater, so it's going to change the color of your paint anyhow. But I'm doing this as my base. And I know some people are probably stressing because now you can't see your pencil lines. Well, I can paint them back in. I can paint my lines in. Sometimes when I paint, I don't even draw it on the page. I just did that for the benefit of those who are developing their skills and want that extra security of having it already outlined on the paper so they don't have to worry about their paint doing something that they didn't want it to do. Alright, so I'm filling in that shell. And this way I can actually see where it is, but this is all a base color. I'm going to be putting other colors over this, so it's okay if it looks green. A little bit of a yellowish green. Alright, and I'm also going to use it on the flippers here. So this also helps you to kind of block in your subject, because the pencil lines are a little bit difficult to see. Alright. But if I fill that in, I now know where the flippers are in relation to the body and the rest of the water. So basically I'm working background, kind of going to the middle ground, and the last thing we'll do is foreground, the closest part to us. And we can also go back in and do details. But just filling in all of these areas. Now this flipper will probably be a little darker and less detailed because it's the underside of the flipper on the other side of the sea turtle's body. So we may not do as much to that one. And if you feel like this is too yellow when you're working with it, you can also add a little bit of white to your yellow. But again, I'm just blocking in some color so I can see where everything is. Notice I'm leaving a little bit of lines where things connect to the body, just in case I need to create shadows. Plus it creates distinction as to where one part starts and one ends. And there's many different ways to approach painting and your artwork. You have to find what works best for you. But I'm showing you this because you do need to start background to foreground. I know there are people who will work this like almost like a coloring page. They'll draw everything out and paint everything very carefully around it, and if that works for you, that's fine, but it's a lot of extra work in my opinion. Let's see. As I look here, this is probably a little more white. So all I have to do is take some of my white, and there's a little bit of yellow that dripped right here. And I'm just going to mix them together, maybe pull a little bit more yellow out. Try not to mess up all of my yellow there. And lighten that up a little bit so it's not quite as yellow as it was. Okay, then I'll clean off my mixing stick. Set that aside. And then we'll just grab some of that color. And I'm going to work on the underside of his mouth and part of the neck. And it's okay if you take your brush and as the paint dissipates, make some textured lines there, because they actually have some wrinkles in their neck here which we'll paint in later. Alright, and I'm going to work the way around that eyeball. Like I said, we're still blocking in color, so this is not what it's going to look like in the end. Alright, but now you at least can tell where your turtle is in relation to the space around it. Okay, so it's blocked in. Now we can use some of our other colors to start to give this more definition. So I've got my nice little lighter brown that I created. And I'm going to go in and I'm going to start creating some of the little spots around here. So there are, and if I don't like it, I can change it up. I can go darker, but it's easier for me to work with this lighter color and then work my way up. Okay, I'm going to leave some space, make the next one. Because what I'm doing is letting that background color create those divisions in the pattern of their shell. So just have a little bit of fun with it. Leave a little space, make another one. Keep on going. Okay, so you're working on those details of your main feature, whether it be a dolphin, sea turtle like this one. But this is creating, like I said, that patterning on their shell. And we're leaving that yellowish green in between to divide up those patterns. Okay, so I've got the bottom pattern, and it can be, this is what will take you the longest time. If you're being very intentional, very careful, and with tempera paint, don't try to put it on too thick all at once, because as it dries, it will crack and it won't look as nice. So you can build up thin layers. As it dries, you'll be okay. Alright, and I'm going to take a little bit of this yellowish white and make a lighter color here, because that allows me to create some of this on the neck, because the color changes a little. You just start building up your colors gradually. So go ahead and work on your main area, and I will come back and let you see the results on this one, and then we'll work on the next step, which is another layer, which is moving forward or into the foreground. Okay, we're also using some darker browns. I mixed some of my brown with a little bit of black. And I'm just tapping my brush in, giving it a pattern. And if you're working on perfectly looking like a picture, then you're going to have to be more precise. But if we're just looking for the basic patterning, this will work. And again, I'm leaving some of that yellow showing. And you can tap in that darker brown for its pattern. So my brush isn't holding its shape as nicely as I'd like. And that's going to be the case when if you're sharing brushes in a classroom or something. You just never know what the condition's going to be, so you have to work with what you've got. And basically, you can paint with almost anything. I mean, we can even use cardboard. So now I'm pulling some of this paint down and letting it create this little shadowy area here. Alright, and there's a little bit right there, and I'm barely touching my paper to get that effect under the neck and around that shell. Okay? But it's a matter of building up layers of color. It takes time. And if you feel like this part is still too light, then we'll just darken it up. If it looks too dark, then the great thing about paint, you can go back and lighten it up. Okay, so then I'm going to go back here and catch this flipper in the back. You just decide what those shapes should look like. And I'm just doing an implied pattern, not exact pattern, just to give you an idea. This is just a quick demonstration. Fade that out. Leave some of that on there. Okay, we'll give a little bit of shadow underneath. Alright, so then this is looking too orange to me on this part, so I'll probably go to the brown that I didn't add any yellow to and go back in and just make some streaks on that and see if I like that better. So leave that color there, and it's not totally dry, so they're kind of blending the two together, which might create a more interesting effect. I like working wet on wet, wet paint on wet paint, because you get, one, it kind of makes you work fast, and it does create some interesting effects along the way. Alright, so keep working. There are some patterns up here as well, so lots of things to work through as you paint your marine life. Okay, I've worked with my turtle as much as I want to for this point, so I think we're good. I'm going to turn my palette around. I've added some other colors in here, and I want to make sure that you can see them on the screen. Now, we've got our turtle, we've got our nice ocean color going on back here. So now I'd like to add something like coral, and we can add that in layers. Sometimes the simplest things can be pretty cool for adding details. So I've just got a piece of cardboard here. Now if you're using a palette like this, it's going to be hard to use. If you have something else that you could dip this in, I'm just going to dip this small side in, since I don't have like a styrofoam plate or a plastic lid that's larger where you can lay it out and you can tap in the paint, because you don't want it gobbed on there, but you do want it to fill the space enough to where it can work. But you can use that to tap in color and make something that's more branch-like, because it gives you a nice easy line to work with. So some coral has that. And if you tap it around enough, as the paint begins to dissipate, it really creates a cool texture. So I'm going to work with that. So I'm just creating some visual interest and some coral that our sea turtle can swim past, and gives a nice view as he's out for his swim. Alright, so there we go. Got some coral started. And if that looks like it is receding into the background too much, you can let it dry a little and then put another layer in. The other thing you can do is layer another color over it. So a lot of times I will use orange, and put the paint a little thicker, like that. Okay, just adjusting the paint. But if I need some highlights, or I need it to pop a little more, I can take another color that's in the same family. And notice I didn't worry about cleaning off the thing. I'm allowing it to blend because I'm working wet on wet. So if you overdo it, you're not going to see any of the orange. But if you just are, so you decide how much you're going to add to it. You don't want it to lose one color over the other. I kind of want both colors to show through. So I'm thinking about where the orange might look the best. And then I just tap it in, create some more little branches here. And there we go. We've got one piece of coral. Branch it out a little more. Okay, it looks like a tree underwater, but it's our coral. All right, and you can also use things like your brush handles and create dots that way. And then you just wipe it off when you're done, and then you can use a new color. All right, so I'm going to let that dry real quick. Okay, so I used my hair dryer, and it's mostly dry now, so I can decide if I want to add some more coral. Another really cool thing to use when you're painting the sea life is just a piece of sponge. This is a piece of sponge that I've cut up, and I'm going to use, I think I'll use some of the orange. I won't use, haven't decided if I'll use red this time, but I'm going to put a piece of coral that kind of overlaps or goes over the top of this one. So there's another type of coral growing in amongst this one. And the sponge gives you this really cool effect, depending on how, so some areas will have this thick paint, some will be thinner, and that gives you that nice texture that we're looking for. And then maybe I want to lighten this one up with a little bit of yellow, so I'm going to dip the corner of this in yellow. And I'm still working wet on wet. I am not worried about, I kind of want the blending, so I'm not worried about if, oh no, it's blending together. It's okay. It's something I'm going for. And if you keep smushing it, it eventually becomes just yellow-orange. So if you want more of the yellow to show, you're going to have to freshen up your yellow. And tap that in there. If you get too much, go to a cleaner spot on the sponge. Try not to drag your sponge unless that's the texture you're going for. Because if you drag it through, it's going to change the look. Alright, but now I've got this really cool looking, almost like a sand. So you've just created a whole nother effect using another thing, something as simple as a sponge. So we've used cardboard, we've used a sponge. You can use other colors as well. Let's see. I have paintbrush handles here. Like I said, you can use that to drag some other things through. I have some green in a container here, so I'm just going to use a little bit of my green. I'm going to dip my paintbrush handle in there, so now maybe I want to drag a little bit of, let's see, where do I want it to exist in my picture? Okay, so this is pretty dark. I don't know if it's going to show, but I can use this. You can use your paintbrush handle as a way of painting too, if you don't have a brush that's thin enough. And if you feel like the green is just too dark, it's not showing up, add a little bit of yellow or white to it. You can make a blue-green, but let's see, this is very dark. So I'm just going to mix some right here. Sometimes when I run out of space in my palette, I create just a tiny bit of color on the side edge here. I know some people kind of freak out when they see another color on the edge, but I'm looking at it and saying, it's right on the edge. It's not mixing, it's staying there. My paint is thick enough to hold it there. And now I can lighten this up and make this little thing here. And if you have a small enough brush, you can paint this in. But I was just trying to show you there are some different ways of achieving what you want when you may not have everything that you were hoping for in front of you for tools. So you can use just about anything. A Q-tip, your fingertips, I mean, whatever gives you the look and the texture you're going for, you can do it. Okay, so I've got that tapped in there. As I'm saying that, I'm getting my fingers in paint down at the bottom, but alright. Just have fun with it. That's the main thing. As you're creating your painting, have fun. And this one's not cooperating like it usually does, but so you find that you're going to have to dip your brush a lot, your handle in there. Okay, And like I said, you can tap it in, get little dots, because I've got some area where it's thicker. Alright, and if you have a thinner brush, you can actually paint those fine lines in. Sometimes they're a little hard to come by, but I have a really thin brush here for more detail, and I could paint those in if that's the look I'm going for, if I want it that controlled. Sometimes too much control takes some of the fun out of it, so just have fun with it. Okay, so I've got some different colors going on. You can add as much, you could add a little starfish down here at the bottom if you wanted. Keep creating, have fun, that's the most important part. Hopefully today these techniques will help you to create a successful painting. You can create all sorts of things. I have the sea turtle here. I also have one where I did a dolphin real quick and I sponge painted in some coral here. Some little streaks of paint, so you let your brush get kind of dry. So I usually work most of the paint off on the palette, like tap it here. So if there's just a small amount of paint, and then you quickly hit the brush across your paper and you can create this illusion of movement in the water. So have fun, be creative, and I look forward to seeing your paintings.